Thank you very much for meeting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Happy McPartlin. I'm a standby on Come From Away on Broadway.
And when did you first know you wanted to be an actress?
I think I first knew when I was about 4 years old that I wanted to do it. When I knew that I really was going to do it professionally was when I was 16. I was cast in a professional company of West Side Story, and all of the other actors were from New York, and I was from Schenectady, New York, so I was a small town person, and all of them were really encouraging for me to come to New York and pursue being an actor here. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm a little bit better than I thought, and so I'll go down there and give it a shot. So I came here to New York before I went to college. I didn't want to go to college and spend all of that money and all that time studying if I then didn't like auditioning, or I didn't think I was good enough, or whatever. So I came down here, and when I graduated 6 months early, and I came down here when I was 17, and then I spent 6 months here auditioning and trying to get my footing in the business before I went to college. And it was terrible and wonderful, and all of those things wrapped up into one. And so I decided that I still wanted to do it. So I thought, well, if it was that terrible and I still want to do it, then it must be worth doing. It must be worth pursuing. So I went to NYU for school and studied at the Tisch School of the Arts, Circle and the Square Studio, and the Classical Studio. So I didn't do musical theater school, but that's what my education was. And then I came out of school. I graduated a year early from there too, because I just couldn't wait to get started. So that's kind of when I knew and how I started off here.
Why musical theater?
Oh, I don't know. I love the stories that we get to tell with music are so powerful, because the music, it's almost a cheat, right? Because the music gives you something else that moves people without me even singing. There's already music playing that's telling you something about how to feel. And what's cool about musical theater is sometimes you have these, really positive things that have these sad undertones in the music. So it's about, how you do those two conflicting things to tell a story is really, really interesting. And that's part of the creative process that is fascinating to me. Is how you can be sort of telling somebody to feel two different things at the same time, and you let them decide how those competing things work in their brain, in their heart, and their soul. So I think, and I also just loved singing. When I was 4 years old, I was putting on Annie in my garage and my yard and everyone else's garage and their yard, and that's how I learned about acting, really was from musical theater, from Annie, the original Broadway soundtrack with Andrew McArdle. And so that's what really made me want to, be an actor, is the music, and how that made me feel like, you feel this gasp of real, true emotion that it's hard to get with just the spoken word. Not that it doesn't happen, it certainly does in plays, but it's just not as frequent for me as it is with music. Just kind of lets it do it easily.
What was the process of auditioning for Come From Away like?
Well, let's see, I auditioned for Come From Away here before they went to La Jolla, and I think I auditioned for Diane, or I may have auditioned for a bunch of different parts, and I wasn't the right fit at that time, so they went and they did La Jolla. I actually moved to Washington, D.C. to start my family, and they were looking for covers in D.C., and I was called by the New York casting director, who knew me from I had worked with Chris Ashley, the director, before, and Junkyard Dogs, the producers, on Memphis, the national tour of that. So she said, I know they really want to see you, can you come in? And that was on a Friday night. I had a 2-month-old baby at home. I just had my son, and they asked me to come in on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to come and do 4 different characters, all of these speeches, all of these songs, and I said, okay, just tell them I have a newborn, so it might not be as good off book as I want it to be. But that's when I went in, so literally, 30 hours later. And And I was, I started a new job at Ford's 2 days after that, and they told me that day that I had booked the part to do, and that would have been like 5 months later. So I started with the company in August of 2016, and I was only with them in DC because my son was so young. I didn't want to pursue coming to New York because I had done a Broadway show before, which I had been a standby for also, and it was really difficult just sitting in the dark for 3 months, the time away from your family. My husband wouldn't understand that, but my little kid, not so much. So I wasn't ready to leave DC to do in that kind of thing yet. So I said, I'm not going to try to go to New York yet, and if it's meant to be, it'll be. So luckily for me, after they read through the script the first time in front of me, I thought, oh, you're so dumb. You're just so dumb because it's going to be a huge hit. It's so special. These people are so special. And I knew I had to make that choice for my family, but I was definitely, a tough choice. So I hoped once I had done that run in DC that I just sort of put it out there. I said, well, if you guys ever need me, just give me a call because I'd be willing to come back to New York, just not right now, but I'll be willing to come back. So you let me know when you need me. And lucky for me, the person who was in my track here on Broadway is from Toronto. And so she wanted to go back to Toronto, and so she was moved to the Toronto company, and I got to come in here. So they called me, this is probably almost a year after I had done the first company in DC. They called me almost a year to the day after that and said, hey, would you be willing to come to New York? And I said, yes.
Wow, almost a year.
Yeah, almost a year.
And what characters do you play?
So I cover Beulah, Bonnie, Diane, Beverly, and Hannah. So, and all of their others characters. My primary characters that I cover are Beulah and Diane, and then everybody else is a secondary cover. But in my first year here, I was lucky enough to go on for all of my secondary covers multiple times, which I never thought I was going to get to do, and that was amazing, because to get to put the work in and then actually get to go on stage and play with it and feel how that feels and get to know that character with all of the life around you is super, super special. But I'm very lucky that I get to go on, frequently enough for Beulah and Diane that I feel super connected to those characters, and I've met those real life people as well, so it means so much to be able to tell their stories and connect to their stories and have other people respond to that.
And how frequently do you get to act usually?
In this show? Fairly often. Like for me, I've been just with everything, I kind of get to go on, at least once every couple of weeks, and sometimes for longer, which is great. I think I'm very, very lucky. I get enough time to play and enough time to watch them play, which is really enjoyable too.
And how far in advance do they usually let you know that you have to replace someone?
Well, it depends. Sometimes, like this week, I knew that someone was out, that Astrid was out. So I knew a couple weeks in advance that was going to happen. So I've known about that for a long time. I have been called in the middle of the show from upstairs to come down and get into costume during costume party to then start the show for somebody after that. So sometimes you have a lot of notice and sometimes you have no notice. The show's already started. And I've been called at like 4:30 in the afternoon for an 8 o'clock show to go on for a secondary character, that's a little scary because those are the ones you know them intellectually, but you don't physically do them as often. So we say it's like your body doesn't have as much memory of it. So you can't trust yourself as much as like with Beulah and with Diane. I've gotten to do them enough that I sort of know where they live. And not to say I never make a mistake, but I can trust myself enough that if the mistake is there, it's very small. Whereas the secondaries, you have to think the whole time. So we call it clenching. When you're like, you gotta clench because you're like, I know this, but you have to think every second while you're out there, as well as not ever let the audience know that you're thinking so much about what's next.
Can you tell me more about learning all these different roles? Like, what was it like? You know, choreography and different accents and everything.
Yeah, it's pretty daunting to look at it in the very beginning. I had covered another Broadway show called Hands on a Hardbody, where I also covered 4 principal characters, but 2 of them were off stage some of the time. 2 of them were always on stage, and 2 of them were off stage sometimes. So that was challenging too. But it wasn't like this, where you have to move every single set piece and work so closely together that, you know, that set was less complicated on that show that I worked on. So I've only ever done this twice, where I stood by for principal characters. I went to that first day of rehearsal, and they read through the script, and then in the afternoon they started by doing the first transition into the first plane. And I watched them do it, and I thought, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? Because they knew it so well, and it just looked like nothing that they did all of this stuff. But I'm looking at that time I was only covering 3 people in DC. So I only watched, you know, those 3 people, and that in and of itself was really scary. And I thought, I'm so lucky I'm not going to New York and covering 5 people. Little did I know. But in DC, you know, as with some of the other productions in La Jolla and Seattle, there's not enough time really to rehearse the understudies by themselves, or not full rehearsal process for the understudies. So you have to learn by watching. And in DC, I thought, this is going to be just, I don't know how I'm ever going to learn this just by watching. But I think that was actually a tremendous gift, because to not have to think about the words or think about what's on the page with the music, or think about, like, I've written down this blocking. I almost started to see every track in almost, it's like its own movie. And so I can refer back to that in my own mind. And I never thought I would learn that way. I'm much more like, I write things out. If I'm memorizing lines, I usually write them out, and I write out other people's lines. But this was a totally different learning process. So I think what I learned the most on this was, your process might change, and your process might be different for every show that you work on, if the show mandates that it be different. And I also learned to trust that I'm more of a visual person than I thought I was. So that became really, really important to me. When I did come to the New York company, I had a little bit of an abbreviated learning time, because they already knew that I sort of knew it, albeit from a year prior. But I learned the Diane track, relearned the Diane track in about 2 weeks, and then had to put in for that, and then started working on Beulah, and then I went on for Diane, and then 3 days later I went on for Beulah. So it was pretty crazy, the learning process for this. And while I was on for Diane and Beulah alternately in the next month, I was also learning, I think I learned Beverly first, and then Hannah, and then Bonnie. And things happened while I was learning while I was learning Bonnie. They said, oh, we need you to go on for Hannah in a week, so or 3 days. Can you should we switch back to that? I said, yes, let's switch back to that. So it's a little bit like, I guess it's like life. You never know what's going to be thrown at you, so you have to just say, okay, now I'm going to put this one on the shelf that's over there, and I'm going to concentrate on her, and you start to see that person's movie and soundtrack in your mind. And luckily for me, like, these people they're so good and talented, and they're so, their energy is always there, so you almost hear it, like the whole show, like a soundtrack. So that's how I learned musical theater when I was a kid. I learned Annie that way, right? Listening to Andrew McPartlin sing over and over and over again, and so that's kind of how I learned the show. I joke that I could practically play Claude at this part, because I can say all the lines. Now, I don't know where he goes, I don't know his blocking, and I don't pretend to be the actor that Joel Hatch is, but I could probably do his part from the lines, just because I know everyone's lines from the show, because that's how my brain chose to pick everything down to learn it, you know?
What's the difference between standby, understudy, and swing?
So a standby is an off-stage understudy for only principal actors. An understudy is usually on stage in the ensemble or in a more featured role, and then understudy is a larger part than theirs, or a more significant principal role. And then a swing is an off-stage cover who generally covers only on-stage ensemble members. So we don't have any swings here, although sometimes people call us swings, and that's fine with us. Swings sometimes do 10, 12 parts. So mad respect to the swings. And they usually get a lot less glory because they're going in for an ensemble track, so they don't get to, have the big bows or the big acting moments as much as we do once we get to go on. But, oh yeah, I've done all those. Sorry, that's my alarm that tells me I should go to the theater if I haven't left yet.
What do you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
Oh, I wish I knew when I was just starting out just to be myself so much more. And I think it's an impossible thing. People actually will tell you that, but we as actors, we're always trying to be someone else, right? We're trying to land a part where we are someone else. And I think learning the distinction between this is another person that you are trying to be, but you have to bring all of yourself to that part is something that it's really hard to understand, especially when you're younger. You think, oh, I have to make them think that I am this part. Just for instance, that I'm doing Beulah tonight, and Astrid is phenomenal, and there's just something about her that is just so grounded and Earth Mother, and it's just sort of in her being, like when she walks around as a person. Now that's my perception as an audience member. I just look at her and I think, oh, she just takes care of everyone. And I don't think of myself that way. Although I have, a little bit of that characteristic, but I don't think of myself like I just exude that. And so the younger self in me would be like, oh, wait, how are you going to make them think that you are this Earth Mother? And it's like, well, now I just bring whatever part of me that is to the part, and I say the lines, and I trust that I have something to offer what that soul is. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been offered the part. And that's once you get the part. When you're auditioning, it's even worse because you have no idea if they think you are right for it, so you muscle that. You're like, how do I dress? And how do I, you muscle all of these things that you're trying to give them what you think they want. And, the God's honest truth is there's no way that you can change into what they want. You are either what they want or you are not. All you can do is do all of your prep work ahead of time, learn your lines as much as you can so that you have the freedom to really be there in the moment and act, and then it's out of your hands. That's really all you can do. And when you're young, you do not trust that at all. Not one bit.
How do you deal with rejection?
Oh, I mean, everybody hates it. It's really difficult. Sometimes it hurts less than others. There'll be projects that you're just really passionate about, and you really, really want to do that job. You really want to work with that person, or you really want to play that part. And those ones, they really hurt. Sometimes, I don't know, I probably eat or have a couple of beers or talk to friends, or all those sort of things that make you feel a little more home and taken care of. I think most of my career has been, I like to say I've been 50 since I'm 15, and I'm still not 50. So when my younger career was a ton of rejection, where I would get up to the end with 4 other people, and then we would all sort of go in one after another to read the parts or sing the songs or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, thank you so much. And I was like, oh, you realized I'm not as old as they are. And my resume was never as padded as theirs because I hadn't had as much experience, because I wasn't as old as they were. I mean, I'd be happy to play 80 if you let me play 80, but I'm not going to have the resume that somebody will have to back that kind of thing up. So I dealt with that a lot in my early career, and one of the ways that I guess I worked through that, and there are a lot of people, it's like if you're not a young leading ingenue kind of person, that's a lot of actors. That's probably most actors who are not like the young love interest. And you have to find your way to work through it. For me, I would do regular jobs so that I didn't always have a day job that I hated. I was a secretary at at Lehman Brothers, and I was a secretary at Citigroup for a long time, an executive secretary. So I made a nice living, and I was treated well at my work, and so that I wasn't always feeling like I'm going to auditions and being treated poorly or being rejected, and then I'm going to work and being poorly tipped and rejected by people who are supposed to be paying you. That was very difficult, I think, for a lot of people I know that got stuck into a cater waiter job that they really didn't like. Like, some people love that stuff, and that's great, but if you don't, you have to find some sort of day job balance that makes you feel okay about what's going on in your day-to-day life. You can't kind of live every aspect of your life like, I have to have a job, and I just hate this all the time, because it's like, it's only you who knows that you feel that way. Unfortunately, no one else cares if you're being rejected and you're not making any money and you're struggling. And so you have to really take care of yourself in that way. And so that's what I found was most important for me to deal with, was knowing that it was a long game for me. I didn't ever have illusions of grandeur, like I was going to walk in and have my American Idol moment and all of a sudden be a Broadway star when I was 21 years old. I sort of knew it was going to be a long game. Now, that being said, it was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I didn't even have an agent until I was 35 years old, like a real agent, until I was 35. And I did great work between, my leaving NYU and when I got an agent, but I didn't have that representation to get me in all of the right doors. And a lot of people say, well, if I don't make it by 30, I'm done, and thank God I didn't do that, because I would have had a very short, small career.
How did you find the courage not to give up?
Oh, I don't know.
Like, how do you know when to let go, or like if you really should keep powering through?
Yeah. I think for everyone it's really individual. I think a lot of people say, like, oh, are you going to give up? And it's like, I don't think of it as giving up. Sometimes I think people decide to move on to something else, because it's not like you didn't do anything. If you were out there and you were trying and you were giving it your all, you didn't give up. You did move on to something else. I mean, most people when, if you're an accountant and then you decide to become a teacher, people will say, oh, so you gave up, you quit being an accountant, or that it's some sort of failure. I think there's some sort of implication, at least personally and emotionally, to actors that is like, I have failed if I give up. And I don't think of it as giving up. I think of it as moving on to something else. I have so many incredibly talented friends who had really good early careers, and then as they got older, people just didn't quite know what to do with them. And I was the opposite. When I was younger, no one knew what to do with me, and so, I had to struggle through if I wanted to get it. They had success, and then they're looking at like, well, if nobody knows what to do with me, I don't want to be hustling like this if no one's ever going to see it. And so some of them have moved on to other things. I know people who've moved on to be interior designers and work as receptionists for hedge funds, and all sorts of things. That these are awesome lives too, because sometimes you say, I did that and that was great, and now I'm going to do this because now I can afford to travel, or I can have my family, I have regular health care, I have all of the things that we as actors are like, oh, well, I never have that, but I've got my dream, So I think my courage was partly I had so many supportive, encouraging friends, and I had enough friends who were making it, they were doing it, they were working hard, and you could see how their hard work eventually was paying off, that I thought, this has to happen for me. And I think every time I really thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore, something would happen that would, it was almost like a sign from the universe that it's like, just keep going, just keep going. Including when I moved down to DC, I really moved down there to start my family, but it was also because the business at the time was just, there was not a lot for me. The shows that were being done on Broadway at that time and such, there just wasn't a lot available to me, and I thought, well, I don't want to spend my whole life just putting all of my eggs in this one basket, because I had also wanted to have kids and have a family of my own, and I thought, people might think I'm giving up or I'm leaving, but I don't really care if that's what they think. I am going to do this because I'm running out of time to do this, to have a family. And that's, it's a finite amount of time for women. So I thought, you know what, I'm done putting all the eggs in this basket over here. I'm going to go do this, and this will probably still be here. And maybe I'll want to come back to it, and maybe I won't. And, I think putting that trust out there for me was a huge leap of faith. And I got really, really deeply rewarded for having that faith.
How do you manage to find balance between your family and career? I mean, your son is still small, right?
Yes, my son he's 3 1/4 right now. And it's probably the best thing about being a standby is having a young child and being a standby. You have times where you are not physically working when you're off stage. You might be looking at your lines, or you might be going over your notes, or you might be watching the show, but you're not always physically out there doing the 8 shows a week. When I am physically doing the 8 shows a week, there's a lot less balance. That's just how it has to be. You have to be at the theater more. You have to practice a bit more self-care, taking Epsom salt baths, doing more stretching, taking more time just to rest and, rejuvenate. So the best possible job I could have right now. Like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, don't you just feel bad that you're not on stage all the time? And I probably, my younger self would have said, of course I would feel bad that I'm not. I always want to be out there. But I love watching them, and I love getting to sit sometimes and just be in my dressing room working on stuff quietly, not using my body, because I've been running around after a 3-year-old all day. He doesn't take any breaks. So to get to actually sit down and just be in the dressing room looking at stuff or listening to stuff is an awesome, awesome gift. I mean, that's how I find the balance. If I had to be on stage, 8 shows a week, it's different. I just did a 2-month stint for one of the parts because somebody was out. And it was really, really difficult. Like, I have a whole different respect for how difficult, even a show that doesn't look like there's a lot of physical dancing or anything, it's really tough on these people's bodies because you're giving so much physical energy, even if you're not doing pirouettes and big kicks and stuff. But it's a lot of physical and emotional energy to give. So I find the balance by being a standby and getting to sit up in my dressing room sometimes, or sit out in the audience, and then be on stage enough to still have all of that spark and all of that love and acceptance from the crew around me.
What do you like the most about being on this show?
Oh, I mean, the people are just so awesome, and the people on stage are awesome. Our crew is awesome. Our producers are awesome. The people that we play are amazing, and we always say that the audience is the 13th cast member, and that's really true. I mean, if you go out to the stage door and there are people from Newfoundland there, and they tell you stories on themselves, or even they're just like, oh, I'm from here, and oh, it's so great, and you guys did such a great job, and you feel proud that you've told their story and that they feel something from it. And I met someone the other night who was she was on Beverly Bass's crew on the flight that landed in Gander. Yeah.
Wow.
And she was so emotional and so moved about it. And I said, well, have you talked to Beverly? And she's like, no, I haven't talked to her in a long time since she retired. And I said, you should reach out to her. Like, she'd love to hear from you. You get to feel all of these different people's, souls come through about how they react to this story and how it touches them. And for me, I was down at the World Trade Center on the day of 9/11. I actually was working as an executive assistant at the time, and I worked in 3 World Financial Center, so I just walked through Tower 1 about 30 minutes before the first plane hit. And so my experience with that day, is very, very specific, as is everyone's, but it was very difficult for me to kind of recognize my own emotions about that day, that they were valid, because I also saw so many terrible things. But I thought, you don't have a right to feel this way, because I didn't lose anyone personally, and I wasn't hurt, and I wasn't, there were so many things that I was sort of judging myself about my reactions to that day. And this whole story has been incredibly healing, both for me and for almost everyone who comes to see it, because it gives you something else to think about for that day. And also gives you a huge realization that everyone felt something tremendous from that happening, even if it was different. And even if we didn't lose people, we all lost something that day that was collective. And if we acknowledge each other's stories instead of, sort of saying, well, I don't have any right to feel that way, or you don't have a right to feel that way because you weren't as close to it as I was, or you don't have a right to feel like that because you didn't lose somebody. And sort of how I judged myself at the time, and how I sort of judged others because I didn't have the bandwidth to take in anybody else's feelings about it because I hadn't dealt with my own. This has, really, really healed that. And I feel like now if I'm out on the line and I see somebody who's having a really emotional reaction to it, I can take that and I can also share my story with them sometimes. So, it's just been incredible to connect with people in that way. It starts on stage, but it goes all the way out to the line outstage and beyond that. How we treat each other on a daily basis, how many times we, don't get really annoyed by the person who's walking too slow in front of us, or who's, walking their phone like this or something like that, because you just have to remind yourself, like, what's the bigger picture and what are we trying to say here? So the people have been extraordinarily life-changing for me in so many ways.
I saw this show 6 times.
Yay!
And like every single time there was a standing ovation.
Yes.
I have never seen such a reaction. Like I saw many musicals on Broadway, but nothing like that.
It's really, it's so special how they constructed it. First of all, when I first read the script for this, before they ever went to La Jolla and stuff, it was a totally different script. And it read like a movie, because it cuts from scene to scene, and most musicals don't do that. So the structure is so different, and you kind of couldn't see how, I was like, how are they going to do this? It's really interesting, but I couldn't see how they were going to do it. And they put this together in such a way that they wove everything so perfectly and were so not precious about things with each other. They worked so well together. Getting to be in DC, that was really the Broadway rehearsal process, was while they were in DC, because that's the longest they had when they knew they were going to Broadway, to get everything sort of the most honed in. And then they did make a few changes after that in Toronto before they came to Broadway, and then a couple when they were here. But most of the big changes happened between Seattle and DC and were implemented there. So I got to watch that process and watch these guys all work together and really work together. No one was ever like, well, I don't know, I think we need to keep that line, or we need to keep that word, or I want to keep my line, or nobody was like that. Everybody was sort of in it for the whole ensemble feel, and telling the story is the most important thing, and everyone really bought onto that. So that was really, really inspiring to me to see that. And I think because they were so, so integral, working together so closely, that it inspires people to feel that way. Plus, our director is brilliant. He never lets you applaud the whole time. So you're like holding in all of your feelings till the very end, and then you're like, I have to jump up because I've been feeling things for an hour, an hour and a half, or an hour and 45 minutes, and no one's let me feel it, or, you can barely get to express it. So it sort of makes people jump up. But thank goodness, if they ever stop jumping, we're definitely doing something wrong, because what they wrote, David and Irene wrote, and what Chris and Kelly and everybody involved has put together is a story that should make you want to jump to your feet, that we can all be this kind of human being to each other, and let them keep jumping.
What was it like to meet the real people?
Oh my gosh, the real people are so fun. I met them later than other people, obviously. When I came onto the show here, Beulah and Hannah, Beulah Cooper and Hannah O'Rourke were here together at the same time. So I met them first, and Astrid introduced me. She said, "Oh, Beulah, this is Happy." She said, one of our new covers. Before she could even get it out of her mouth, Beulah pulls me in for a big hug, and she goes, "Oh my God, you gotta come to Gander, stay at my place, or I'm gonna screech you in," and all this. I mean, I was just like, she's just like she is in the show, absolutely just like she was in the show. And then Hannah was so like warm, but like quiet. She was like the quiet version of Beulah, and Beulah's like the outgoing. But Hannah reminded me of my grandma, because my grandmother is actually, was an devout Irish Catholic lady. Her parents came over from Ireland, so she didn't come from Ireland directly, but her parents came from Ireland, and so she reminded me of that spirit, and the two of them, they almost look related. So that was the most interesting thing to me, is that they formed this sort of sister relationship, and now they almost look like they could be related. And then I very, very specially got to go out to do a press event in Milwaukee with Nick and Diane. So I got to go out there and introduce the fact that Come From Away was going to be added to their season in Milwaukee. So I first met them, we met them at lunch, myself and Tony Lepage, who's one of the other covers, went out to do this event. And so we said, they had gotten there earlier, we arrived that day, and we said, what did you all do this morning? And she said, well, we went down by the river, we were walking down, and we just like, we just saw some things that said that, the Germans landed here and they did this, and so it was exactly like she is in the show. It was exactly, and he was taking pictures the whole time of everything, documenting everything, and I thought, wow, this is really just exactly like the show. Like, they have gotten everything so spot on. And then we did the event at night, and afterwards we all went out to dinner, and they were so fun. They just were so open to new experiences, probably because of what happened to them, that, if they had been like, oh, hi, yes, of course you can sit here, and then turned away and never spoke to each other, look what they would have missed out on. So they sort of keep that spirit. I mean, they went out, they wanted to go bar hopping with us, because we were going to go to this cool bar that I had been to when I've been through Milwaukee on tour, and so they were game. They were like, sure, we'll go out with you, and then that bar was closed, so we went somewhere else, and they just were, open and so fun and ready for anything that life was going to give them. And I thought that's what actually helped me to find my Diane the most, was I thought, this lady, I'd always thought she must be pretty open if she would open herself up to sort of meeting this person in such a weird circumstance. And then once I met her, I thought, yes, that's exactly it. And so then I sort of used that to really find the depth in the characters. Like, well, if you really opened yourself up to experiences the way you witnessed this lady open herself up, what would that be like? And so that's how I feel like I found my version of Diane.
Did you ever go to Gander?
No, I haven't been to Gander. Unfortunately, since I started working here, I haven't had enough time off to go to Gander, and my baby is way too young.
Right.
My baby is too young. I would never inflict that on anybody, even though I'm sure they'd all be like, "Oh, it's no problem. Just take the car, take the bed, take the crib, take the whatever." But no, I really, really look forward to it. I'm so, it's just, I feel like. So Diane Davis, who's the other part of Beulah, she posts things all the time. She posts these beautiful pictures.
Icebergs.
Yes, the icebergs, and I love it. Like, I'm a lake girl. I love water. I grew up spending all my summers on Lake George with my family, and because that's where my grandparents had been, and their parents before them, and I just love seeing water and mountains and everything. Just sort of that simple, like the simpler life. And so I love that. And I love that she posts them all the time. It just makes me feel like a little bit closer to their home. And so I can't wait to go up there. But no, I haven't been yet.
I know that Astrid went to visit Beulah.
Yes, on her vacation. She took 2 weeks off. Last year, it was in September. It was actually around September 11th that she went up and spent a week up there with Beulah and Diane and all of those guys. And she had the best time. I can't even imagine how much fun it would be to go there and do all the real things. It's nice enough that we get visitations from all the real people from the show, and also all these Newfoundlanders who are just so excited about it. I can't wait to go there. And I've had so many people tell me online, they're like, I'm gonna go to Newfoundland now because it just seems like the most awesome place. So I agree. I can't wait to go there.
Is it typical for Broadway shows to have such a close, like a family kind of relationship?
I think a lot of shows do. I mean, a lot of shows do, and some don't. I mean, sometimes when shows are a bit bigger, it's been my personal experience with when shows are a little bit bigger, like if you have more than 20 people in the cast, it tends to get a little splintered off just because 20 people have a hard time hanging out all together. You know, all the time. And some shows, like I've done Hairspray and Memphis, where it's literally, it's sort of, divided along racial lines because there are scenes where there are only African American people, there are scenes where there are only white people, and so you rehearse separately. So it's not that you don't get along regularly and you don't spend time together, but you have a shared experience with this group of people that you rehearse with that the other people don't have, and vice versa. So I've had that experience, like touring with those two shows, that even though you like everybody, you will gravitate towards the smaller group that you worked with more. Well, here we have sort of a smaller group and we all work together. But even then, the onstage cast, like they have a shared experience that we don't have as standbys. But we're very much included, so we always feel like we're part of things, but maybe not to the same exact degree, but I would call it, it's kind of like having a family where you're like, well, you're the younger cousins, and so you might sometimes not be included in the big cousin things, but that's just because they were doing something that you weren't interested in doing, or you weren't around when they were doing it. But yeah, I mean, it really is like a family, and occasionally, like Uncle Joe might be a little miffed at cousin Jane, but it's it really is like that. Like, I'm not going to say that it's always like you can't be always kumbaya. Everybody's not having the best day every day, but they are incredibly giving. We've had 3 people get married this year. We've thrown them all like good luck parties before because we can't all go to the weddings.
Peter, you have a food delivery.
We can't all go to the weddings and stuff like that, so we throw them a party beforehand because it's that kind of thing. We wish that we could be there, so we'll do the next best thing and have a family thing here. So I don't think most shows are just like this one, but because this is really, really special. And we were luckily handpicked by people who wanted to find really kind people. So, even on our worst days, I think we're one of the best groups that I've ever been a part of.
Sorry, it's 6:50. Is there anything you would like to talk about? I didn't notice that.
No, that's okay. Something that I found like really super important in my life and my career is being really, really well balanced and trying to keep learning. So this is something that I kind of find as something else that has helped me keep going through the difficult times. Is sometimes you can beat yourself up for not being good enough to get the part or whatever it is, or you can look at it as like, okay, well, I still have something to learn. And I was always sort of like a small fish in a big pond kind of person. I thrive on being the person who's trying to do better. I don't thrive on, like, if I'm the best person in the room, I'm sort of like, oh, okay, well, I don't like that kind of attention. I don't like, I actually went and applied for a school or auditioned for a school where they were like, oh, you need to come here, you need to come here. And I was like, oh, this makes me really uncomfortable. Like, if you want me this much, that, like, I want to be where I'm sort of at the bottom or the medium part of the pack, so that I'm learning from people who are better than me, who have something else to offer, or not even better, but have something else to offer. Like, I've never been a person who's like, I want to be the center of things. And it's something that you need to understand about yourself as well. Some people, they do thrive on that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But knowing how you thrive in that situation is really good. You have to find, if you're the big fish in the small pond, then you've got to find the small pond to keep that balance. And then life balance of just having family and work that keeps you sane and grounded, and knowing that, like, your family is always there. Like, they will always be there for you if you are there for them, and sometimes when you're not there for them. Keeping that life balance is really, really important, because the rejection, the times away from all of the weddings, most of the funerals, you know, that gets really, really tough. So, you know, keeping the balance as much as you can of, you know, being with your family when you can, not missing anything that you can avoid missing has been really important to me.
Well, thank you very much. This
Thank
is the end
you.
of the interview.
Thank you.